Well, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the broadcast. You're watching Morning Express on this 23rd day of March. It's always a pleasure to have you with us as we get to kickstart your day in style, bringing you up to speed with the latest developments as they happen. My name is Jesse Rogers. Please stay with us till the tail end of the broadcast as we get to interrogate some of the latest developing issues emanating from Kenya and, of course, from beyond our borders. As usual, I'd like to begin with the latest on the international news. But even as I do that, remember you can interact with us at KTN News KE, even as we bring you up to speed. So let's begin with the Daily Monitor, the latest news coming from Uganda. And it's all about how the shock, panic and chaos engulfed coronavirus response. Even after a year after Covid-19 broke out in Uganda, the country has lost at least 334 lives to the pandemic, many remaining in hospital and thousands are battling the after effects of the disease. We have a list of perhaps those who have been affected right there from Uganda, even as Uganda-Rwanda border medics strike over pay. Some issues right there that has crippled business and traffic at the border point between those two countries. Families are crying out to the government for help in terms of their missing kin, where the government has released a list of 177 people, mainly supporters of the National Unity Platform, who had been allegedly arrested. That's the latest from Uganda. Let's take a look at what's happening in Tanzania, bearing in mind it's quite a busy week as they inter the former president, the late John Pombe Magufuli. Now, Museveni says Tanzania and Uganda were supposed to sign an oil pipeline deal on March 22nd, where Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni revealed that he had sent a letter to his Tanzanian counterpart, which would have seen the two heads of state seal the crude oil pipeline deal. Of course, there's continuation with Samia Suluhu as the president. She mentioned she's firmly in place as the president, so we'll definitely get to see how that continues, even as President Samia Suluhu says this were Magufuli's last words to me. Find out on The Citizen, even as a family loses 5 members at Magufuli's farewell at Uhuru Stadium, who were killed in a chaos that erupted at the Uhuru Stadium, of course, due to the large number of crowds that prevailed during that particular ceremony. Let's cross over to Rwanda now. Now, Rwanda records UK, South Africa virus variants. Of course, scares around this new variant. We well know we're in the 3rd wave, and most countries are reeling from this particular shock. It has found at least 12 cases of the UK and South Africa variants, even as mourners lined up in Dodoma streets to bid Magufuli farewell, as the commissioner says Jamhuri Stadium is too small for the huge number of mourners. A man who was loved in life and death as well. Let's cross over to the East African. One of the stories they've highlighted, similar to what we've just taken a look at, emanating from Rwanda, where they have recorded at least 12 cases of the UK and South Africa variants, even as Suluhu vows to protect the patriot Magufuli's legacy. And of course, she has gotten some lessons from her predecessor, of which she assured Tanzanians and the international community that she will firmly continue ruling that particular country. CNN World News. Let's take a look at some of the stories they've highlighted. They were beaten, or they wanted democracy. Instead, they were beaten and raped by police. Some of the issues highlighting from stories around the world. Saudi officers to allow fuel ships in Yemen. Peace proposal after CNN investigation exposes toll of blockade, even as the Brazilian governor says millions are paying price due to psychopathic Bolsonaro. That seems to be the latest from world news. We'll definitely continue shedding light on that, even as we appreciate the fact that Miami rather is trying to instigate curfew due to the spring break and the rising cases of coronavirus in that particular area. So that's some of the latest from the international scene. Of course, we'll keep you updated right here. But let's shift focus right now to what has been covered on the local dailies. The Standard, the Daily Nation is right here, and the Business Daily. We'll get some time to interrogate some of the stories covered in the papers. And joining me in studio to help us deliberate on this particular matters, I'm joined by Kevin Osido, who's a governance expert. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you. How are you today?
Very fine, thank you. Nice to see you. We're also joined by James Gakuya, who's the Embakasi North Member of Parliament. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Well, a lot is happening. Let's take a look at the front page of the Standard. It's centered on the BBI hurdle, at least the latest hurdle, even as Parliament is with the bill currently. Uhuru, Raila allies surprise BBI move, and it's all about the stalling that is happening. Even as a new clamor by a House team populated by allies of Uhuru and Raila to amend the BBI bill has raised the heat over what has been dubbed Parliament's ceremonial role. A lot of questions around this, especially since they're instigating public participation. Is it all ceremonial? At least we'll get to interrogate that, even as the Daily Nation goes with the headline, Civil Servants Face Pay Cuts in July. Of course, the latest coming from the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, who announced a couple of proposed guidelines aimed at taming the ballooning wage bill in the country, where employees where under the plan, allowances government employees earn will not exceed 40% of their gross pay and will be paid in absolute amounts. At least good news coming there in terms of reducing the wage bill, but will it be successful? Well, let me start with you, Kevin Osido. I'd like to begin on the front page of the Standard, perhaps on the role of members of Parliament in this particular constitutional process. Talk to us about this.
Jesse, thank you so much. By constitution, indeed, the National Assembly and the Senate, Parliament have roles to play when it comes to constitutional amendment. If you look at Article 256, 257, all the way to 260, on the issues around amendment, I think one of the things that we have not done very well as a country is to come up with a minimum threshold. Well, the Constitution is clear around what issues need to be taken to a referendum when it comes to either parliamentary initiative or rather a parliamentary process or a popular initiative. But the misstep there, in my view, is the process in terms of how it is supposed to be carried. So much so that you realize that, for instance, the chair of the commission, for whose role is the issues of constitutional amendment and referenda, actually goes to the Senate and says we have been left out of this process. So I see gaps which we need to define in terms of the legislation to be able to put to effect the process of constitutional amendment in terms of setting the bare minimum threshold, even including matters around public participation. Because if you listen to, for instance, the kind of conversations that citizens had with the BBI steering committee and then the task force, and then you listen to, then you go through the two reports, the 2019 and then the 2020 report, then you move on to the kind of conversations that are taking place in Parliament, you'll realize that citizens are excited about this entire process, particularly because of the fact that it is our first amendment of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Yeah. But the bit that is missing is the process. And the procedure is clear because the Constitution has clearly underscored what needs to be done. But in terms of the process, what follows what and who is supposed to initiate what, even up to the point where we are talking about the role of the National Assembly and the Senate, I think that, in my view, is the missing link. And then two is the manner in which we are more or less rushing the process. Yes, of course, there is no better time to amend a constitution. The sovereign power is rested on the people, and so they are free to amend it at any time within which they feel that certain things are not working. But I think that, therefore, means that the people for whose role the Constitution has given the representative function of the people need to also move with haste. So JLAC, Justice and Legal Affairs Committee of both houses need to move forward. The Joint Committee needs to move forward. And also the Constitution Implementation Oversight Committee, I think that is chaired by Mheshimiwa Jeremiah Kioni, need to also move forward to be able to provide direction and to be able to guide Kenyans on how the process needs to be followed, so that then we don't see delays. Because remember, the delays that are encountered within this particular process affects the second Tuesday of August, which is the election date in the fifth year.
Yeah.
And so if we do not work backwards within that time frame, then it means that we are going to be either left behind, and that's why we hear some people talking about, can we push this election forward? But yet people also have that opportunity to exercise their democratic right, which is in the election.
Okay, so it seems members of parliament don't want to be reduced to conveyor belts, even as some members raised questions around what the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Review intended on their role exactly in this particular constitutional process. Let's bring you in, even perhaps as you clarify, if you're a member of either of these committees, Mheshimiwa Gakuya, talk to us about Parliament's role, because it seems members of Parliament are keen on a couple of issues, including the distribution of this 70 new constituencies. And apart from that, they also want to take a look at some of the issues surrounding the constitutional amendment bill. Talk to us about this.
Thank you, Runjas. It has been well explained by my co-panelist that the authors of the Constitution actually were selfish a bit in terms of powers of both houses, because you find that actually the powers have been entrenched to the county government, where the threshold is targeted at that level, where if the 47 counties could not raise anything to do with the 24 number of counties approval, then the bill dies at that point. But once the bill gets that threshold, automatically, whether it can be dropped by both houses, it will still see the light of the day, because it has to move back to the head of state and back to the people. In this particular case, where the standoff is arising, is in areas where there is these two core committees of both houses. And the relevant is that we have already a commission which is entrusted by the Constitution to handle issues to do with the boundaries. And it is very clear in the current Constitution that the mandate of Electoral Commission is to do what we call looking into areas of population on where they could realize that, in fact, the numbers are too much, and where they can do amendment to what we call boundaries. But the proposed BBI bill actually is only allowing the Electoral Commission only 6 good months to realize this particular dream, which is a very short period to them. Actually, you find that they are demanding not less than 2 years to be able to move or to put themselves into this particular package. Now the relevant is, yes, now that we have already a constitutional order which mandates the Electoral Commission to deal with these boundary issues, which supersedes the other. Is it the BBI, which is a proposal, or whether it's already the standing law which gives the mandate to the same commission? So that's a big question. And then the stalemate is here, where the already subcommittees were unable now to make a clear direction whether to go with the proposal of the BBI, or whether to go with the mandate given by the Electoral Commission by the Constitution.
Okay.
So that is a big issue. Also, there is other elements, other areas where you find like the GSC is also putting a lot of pressure on the manner in which now the proposal in the BBI is going to be handled, and they are not comfortable. And you find their clamor is already the existing law has created the office of ombudsman, which is anchored at the under the under the GSC, but on a manner that the ombudsman is not directly dealing with the GSC, but actually it's through the we call them Chief Justice. Then they can change their issues through that particular change.
Okay.
And there's an issue at that particular area, and also there is an issue at that other part of constitutional boundaries. And it's a matter that which has not given this particular committee a clear way of how to move forward. And we know when a committee, what committee does is to do voting. At any single doubt or any single approval, a committee required to do voting. And when maybe probably this vote is put on the floor and they don't get the threshold, then it's very hard for the committee to say they have seen the light on this. Okay. Therefore, that is an area where probably they will like to seek the mandate from the from the others of the same. But at this particular point, okay, it seems to be a big issue now that timeline may be not within the time scheduled by the elders of BBI.
Exactly, and that stalling might actually affect a lot of processes going forward, even as Kevin Osido mentioned that. So on page 4, they actually highlight some of the hurdles MPs have raised around the BBI, whether or not Parliament can actually amend issues brought up during public participation, but they're bound not to. That's according to Article 257. They're required to pass it as it is. Kevin Osido, let me bring you up on this. The creation of new administrative units is under IEBC. At least that's what Wafula Chebukati mentioned, and it seems to have put the body in contention with KNBS, the Bureau of Statistics. Talk to us about this, because IEBC mentioned that, just as Gakuya mentioned, they need at least 2 years for the demarcation process.
Jesse, we will have to be very candid about the state of BBI, because in as much as it's the best thing that is happening for Kenyans today, in my view, and having listened to the citizens speak to the steering committee and the task force at that point in time, and having gone through the 2 different documents, including the Constitution Amendment Bill, it has robust proposals that if we can be able to put to the fore and implement them, we are going to have one of the best countries, both constitutionally, administratively, and even looking at policy issues that have been made through recommendations of the BBI. But one thing that BBI must not, in my view, do is to circumvent legal processes. So, for instance, the IEBC Act is very clear around time for which and within when boundaries can be reviewed. If IEBC says that they need 2 years, that is what it is that the crafters and the drafters of that particular legislation had envisioned. And that, in my view, I think it can happen only after 10 years. And I think this is probably going to be that time when boundaries review, therefore, are necessary. But if you look at the proposals, there is no clear process within which, therefore, these 70 sub-counties or constituencies are going to be created. Yes, there was a question between our legislators as at the time when that proposal came to the report, and questions were asked around how are you going to determine which areas and how are we going to divide these constituencies. And a magical number of, I think, 141,000 was arrived at, that for any constituencies that have more than 141 plus voters, then they will require to be reviewed. But the role is not political. The role is domiciled within the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. So it is their responsibility, and that is why I think there needs to be conversations around the process. Are we going to say that if we went to the referendum, Kenyans will have to be asked to have a vote on boundaries? Yes, so, because that is what Article 257, 256 have actually given, that it is a purview within which Kenyans are expected to undertake a vote. But if you look at how we arrive at that particular process, there is a lot of darkness within that kind of journey. And so it will be very, very important for us to have conversations around government agencies and constitutional commissions, especially those whose mandates have been put into the BBI report and on the issues that are going to be taken to the referendum. So if the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics have an opinion around the BBI proposal, their mandate is in terms of numbers. And that mandate is not to create boundaries.
Okay.
The boundaries mandate is domiciled within the IEBC. So can we therefore see government speaking to government, agencies speaking to agencies, and departments speaking to departments, so that Kenyans are not confused? Because I think, Jesse, the BBI conversation has come from a very long, dark hole, and we are now headed towards that point where they say light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't think the promoters of the BBI, that is His Excellency the President and the former Prime Minister, would want to see a lot of darkness clouding this baby that they want to birth for Kenyans, particularly because the legacy of the President, as we have been told and as we can see, rests in how the BBI process is actually carried through and worked on. So I think from governance perspective and leadership processes, it is important that government speaks to government and that we have conversations other than what we see. This hand is saying this, that hand is saying the other, and then citizens are left in a manner in which there is a lot of confusion.
Okay.
But I think there is room for us to have conversations around what are we supposed to do and who is supposed to do it. And in that sense, therefore, the statisticians within KNBS have their role well spelled out, and then the boundary reviewers at IEBC also have their role very well spelled out.
Okay, Osido, let me raise this particular issue. In case Parliament actually managed to make a couple of changes within the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020, it seems that's what they want, would we require fresh signature collection, according to you?
That is actually a pandemonium in my view, because remember, why public participation is because citizens are expected to have their say in this particular process. The gap, which is what I already determined earlier on, was on the threshold.
Okay.
So even if you were to take it back to citizens, would we still be going back to at least half of the 47 counties or 24 county assemblies? Would we want to have fresh public participation processes? What would be the role of the steering committee and also the task force? Yes, of course, the former vice chair, Dr. Adam Solo, told us that their role was basically to collect views and set up a report and then submit it. But you see, the buck still stops at where this whole process began.
Right.
So when it comes to public participation, Jesse, and in the manner in which we do not have a law or a legislation around threshold, what you said is actually the right thing that we would have to do. Take it back to citizens and begin the process of review. And remember that we are working within a set time frame. So if we continue going back and forth to the people and then back to National Assembly and then the Senate, remember that still the questions around how much amendments can Parliament do will still arise.
Okay.
And that is only happening, Jesse, because we do not have a law that is supposed to determine the threshold, roles and responsibilities of both the public participation process and then Parliament at the Senate and the National Assembly level.
Okay, that's proper. Well noted. We'll definitely continue deliberating on that. It's covered on page 4 of the Standard, so do grab yourself a copy and be adequately informed, even as the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill, which underwent public participation last week, will not be tabled today at the National Assembly and Senate for the second reading. Gentlemen, let's cross over to health matters. Of course, we well know we're in the third wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Just yesterday, we recorded the highest ever positivity rate ever since coronavirus was detected in the country, above 22%. That was the positivity rate. Even as, perhaps taking a look at page 5, the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, has sort of shifted blame to the counties as COVID positivity rate now hits 22%. And it's all about giving account of the support the counties got. That is the challenge Mutahi Kagwe is forwarding to the counties. Remember, the national government disbursed around 5 billion shillings to counties at the initial stage of this particular virus to aid in preparedness. We saw that particular motivation for counties to have over 300 beds in terms of fighting this particular pandemic. But on page 6, they actually highlight that most counties are ill-equipped to battle the COVID-19 virus in this third wave of viral attack. This is quite scary, Gakuya, bearing in mind the prevalence rate of coronavirus right now. Talk to us about the issue on preparedness and accountability.
Lord, what I can say, really, this is not the point when we are supposed to be pointing fingers to each other. I am sure that, in fact, the national government has known well its law, and as the matter to do with health is well devolved, I believe that, in fact, the national government has also devolved the resources to the counties to deal with this particular effect. What is coming up is that actually there's a clamor down there from the counties that actually they have not been well equipped. But the big question is, are they receiving their dues to deal with this particular pandemic? If the answer is no, then somebody is tripping on his job. And I believe that in this particular case, I would say that it is the Treasury, because the Ministry for Health is not the ministry which devolves money to the county government. The duty is entrusted to the exchequer after every budget. The budget disposal are under the hands of the Treasury. And therefore, if there is somebody who is sleeping on his job, making things difficult down there, should be Treasury, and the Treasury should wake up and make sure that actually it distributes resources equitable, and that resources that are part of this particular pandemic process.
But even if the Treasury does release or disburse these funds, how accountable are we that these funds will actually go to the proper use in the counties and the devolved functions?
One thing is that, in fact, the author of the Constitution, there is one element that he failed to make, that actually the monitoring process. Because you find that, in fact, it is not the single, the single kind of disbursement which has got issues. We have grants, that those grants that are entitled to some units of the health unit down there. But you find that, in fact, the chain that this money has to go through the county government. And when this money reaches to the account of county government, sometimes this money are diverted, not to go to the main use, but are diverted to other use. This particular case may also appear to this particular matter of pandemic, where you may find a situation where these resources probably are well devolved and distributed down there, but you find that most of the counties may not be doing the right things, diverting these particular resources to other use. And if this is the case, then this is a very serious case, and the governors down there should make sure that, in fact, they are doing the right thing to the public, because there is one thing that we cannot joke with. We cannot risk with the lives of the people. And in this particular case, every other governor down there must make sure that now it's a high time. This particular wave is coming, is the strongest wave ever, and resources has to be harnessed and be put in the right position, in the right packages, where it's, the needs is supposed to be.
All right.
In this particular area, you find that actually there was a conditionality of equipping, having those isolated areas, every county, and at this particular time, no governor can wake up to tell us that actually he has not realized to this particular aspect, because time was good enough. If somebody is not yet there, then he's sleeping on his job.
Okay, well, it's 1 year down the line. Definitely time was there. Kevin Osido, let's talk about some of these issues. Even as it's revealed that some counties might be ill-prepared, it's quoted right here on the Standard that Vihiga County was unable to operationalize the 5-bed ICU due to lack of oxygen. Kakamega County has 6 operational ICU beds out of available 16. Busia has 4 functional ICU beds. Kwale County, 10 ICU beds in several facilities. Looking at this and the number of prevalence, especially with community transmission, bearing in mind the high positivity rate, these are grim statistics. What is the way forward?
Jesse, engaging with county governments, I think one of the things that we have not done very well is to come up with a monitoring framework in terms of how are we faring on. And in terms of faring on, I mean when coronavirus started 1 year down the line, March 14th, 2020, we have had a lot of conversations, including high-level government, intergovernmental meetings, which include the summit chaired by His Excellency the President. We have had 2 high-level COVID-19 conferences that have been graced by none other than His Excellency the President and all the 47 governors. A lot of promises have been made during those conversations. A lot of conversations have taken place. But the question is, are they only discussions that are taking place so that we can be able to tick a box? Or when the President says, county governments, can you set aside 300 bed capacity units? Who goes back to check that Vihiga County has actually done the 300 bed capacity? Who goes back to check that Meru County has actually done that? Who goes back to check that Taita Taveta County, that Siaya County, that Tana River County, that all the other 47 counties have actually done what is expected? One. Two, when we talk about COVID-19 preparedness for county governments, what does that mean, especially when doctors continue to be on strike and are not sure about their safety? 1 year down the line, when we talk about community infections, and we're still talking about some areas not having water, access to water, despite the fact that we are celebrating, while we celebrated World Water Day yesterday, but our counties are still not doing very well in terms of water, particularly, Jesse, that water is one of the biggest, the biggest
hygiene enablers, yes.
Enablers, and of course, I'm looking for the cure, you know, that you wash your hands with the water and soap for 20 seconds. And so that therefore means that to a greater extent, you will not have to go to a health facility for where you will need ICU beds and all that. We haven't done a lot when it comes to disease prevalence and just preparing our citizens to be able to safeguard ourselves against those infections.
All right.
So in my view, whether resources have been sent to counties or not, yes, of course, Treasury has not done very well. The national government is still holding a lot of resources at Treasury that is supposed to go to counties. But we also need to move forward and begin a very robust conversation around conversations with citizens, whether it's going to be health education on how then we can be able to fight this third wave of COVID-19. Just it has to be each and every one of us putting our hands to deck and doing our roles. Let national government do its part, county government do its parts, and even me as a citizen. What is my role in supporting my county to take care of each and every one of us within our societies, within our communities? Because government alone will not win the war on COVID-19.
Exactly. The government really doesn't need to have to enforce these guidelines. Kenyans are definitely encouraged, and we encourage you to actually stick to the COVID-19 guidelines, which might definitely keep you safer. And it's also proper to note, talk of laxity among Kenyans, Gakuya, even with the immunity the COVID-19 vaccine ongoing. Questions around the immunity and how long it takes has actually a reason. Most importantly, and I beg to point this out for our fellow viewers, is actually that immunity takes 3 months to become fully effective, and that particular vaccine lasts up to a year. So you get 2 jabs, which are 8 weeks spaced, and immunity doesn't mean you cannot get COVID-19. It only means that the adverse effects will be much less. So Gakuya, speak to us about the laxity amongst Kenyans, especially when it comes to mask wearing and observing some of these guidelines, because we saw the NMS actually get a couple of Kenyans who are roaming the streets of Nairobi without following these guidelines, and they're doing community service right now.
Rogers, let me say, we have been doing very well, and as a nation, I would say we have performed tremendously well, because you realize that, in fact, like in Nairobi, is where you have a lot of informal sector, and the rate in which that actually we expected that you hate this informal sector actually is not it was not well batted off. But currently, I would say this third wave, it seems to be so stronger than what the first and second was, and the laxity of Kenyans is well known, because actually we forget very fast as a nation. And I don't know why, because actually it's like when things started nosediving, it's like we decided that now the issue to do with COVID is gone. But people are forgetting that the virus may have gone down because of the precautions and the othering of those precautions. And when we relax from those precautions, it tells you that the virus are still within our midst, and we are the people who always carry this particular virus with us. And it is not, the virus does not walk. Virus does not have what you call eyes or ears. Actually, this virus is us who walks with. And in this particular case, I would apologize is that Kenyans must well in their mind that nobody else and no angel will come to save the country.
All right.
It's only themselves. And therefore, the serious need is to make sure that actually each one is a guardian of the other. And how can you become the guardian of the other? It's only being very strict that, in fact, you adhere to the COVID protocols. And no short of that. Issues to do with the wearing of masks is mandatory. And when you find somebody walking in the streets of the city where there is a lot of congestion without a mask, then you fail to understand who will wear the mask, or who this gentleman does he not live in the same country. Therefore, this is a laxity I would like to emphasize that we require to emphasize to the community that the monster is still with us, and it has not moved anywhere.
All right.
And therefore, the best thing to do is to make sure that we always keep on the protocols given by the ministry.
And the third wave is actually even worse in terms of the adverse effects, so kindly stick to those guidelines released by the Ministry of Health. Let's touch on something that touches on the ballooning wage bill in the country, that new push for civil servants packs cards. It's on page 8 of the Standard, and it's emerging that the Salaries and Remuneration Commission is actually pushing through a new policy to control allowances earned by employees in the public sector. Now, according to that draft, the SRC has actually published a draft allowances and benefits policy that, if adopted, will cap such benefits in terms of allowances for civil servants. And that policy also carries proposals to abolish some allowances, such as non-practicing allowances that have become redundant. Kevin Osido, this issues to do with governance. Perhaps it's your cup of tea. Talk to us about this.
Our country is not doing very well, particularly when it comes to two things. One, the widening, the ballooning debt ratio. And then two is indeed the wage bill. And if you look at the manner in which certain laws and policies are set, for instance, human resource for public service, the question that we ask at certain levels is functions follow roles, and then they follow resources. If you have in an office 10 people doing a similar role, or, for example, you have a staff whose role is only to receive letters, and then somebody stamps them, another one comes and picks them and takes them to what is called the registry. The question is, what is really the essence of this change? Remember, of course, the other bit of it is to ensure that people have employment, and that government is offering those employment opportunities. Isn't there another way in which we can be as innovative to ensure that people have employment, but that government delivery is also very efficient and effective? Because a lot of where we have seen duplicity of roles and multiplicity of functions, yes, we have not seen very effective services being delivered. And so that is because there is bound to be a lot of blame games. I didn't do it because Jesse didn't do his part, or Jesse will say, I was waiting for Mheshimiwa Gakuya to also do his part. And then ultimately, you begin to ask yourself, so why are all of us here? Why SRC has come up at this particular point in time is indeed to be able to deal with the ballooning debt and also the wage bill issues. Whether it's going to be in allowances or in other spheres of cuts, that's a conversation that we really must have as a country. But also remember, Jesse, that we have not done very well in terms of creating job opportunities. So that therefore means that we are widening the risk of unemployment, but also rather slimming the risk of the unemployed. And also we have not done well to be able to generate revenue. So if you go to counties, for example, we are still grappling with the question around on-source revenue. So can counties be able to generate their own resources? Because ultimately all these resources and all these monies go back to what is called the national treasury, for where then all the monies are counted and then distributed through the budget process.
All right.
And then, of course, we look at the different sectors of our economy. The third thing which we have also not done well is to look at how are the sectors that are receiving a bigger chunk of our monies performing. So if you go to manufacturing, for example, we have done a lot of very heavy investment in terms of infrastructure, but we have not gone back to look at how much are we getting after we have invested in all these railway lines, we have invested in all these, the feasibility assessment processes, that how much are we getting from the new factories that are coming up and all that. Can we be able to begin to ask how many young people are being employed, are being absorbed by these new frontiers that we are coming up with? Okay. The Big Four is one such other. So SRC mitigative measure is one of it. It is a good thing to do, but it's also because, Jesse, the government is the biggest employer. So if you reduce taxation, rather if you increase taxation for government officials and also reduce the amount of allowances and some of these per diems, then chances that you're able to safeguard and increase more revenue is high. But then the other question is, how sustainable is that? You have retirees, people who are going to retire. You have people who are also changing their job groups and job levels. So I think that policy needs to be really tightened.
Okay, we'll definitely get to interrogate it even as it proceeds. But it's also been highlighted on the Daily Nation, page 10, where they actually give us a little bit of information on how civil servants pocketed allowances totaling to 322 billion, which is enough to build another standard gauge railway from Mombasa to Nairobi without having to take a loan. So, Akuya, this speaks to the hefty sums that perhaps people in the public service might pocket in terms of allowances. Some employees might even earn allowances that are double their salaries. Talk to us about this policy. How timely is it, and the sustainability issue?
Roger, I think where we are getting along as a nation, one is the manner in which our shillings is losing what we call control. And, I believe that economically the strength of our shillings carries a lot of weight. But when the shillings becomes too weak, it tells you that, in fact, even though you have a hefty of a magnitude of a salary, that salary may not mean anything to you. So you may find packs that are between maybe probably 100,000 or 200,000. But once you remove the deductions of taxes, you still come to find that somebody is earning something which cannot even afford him to be on his own making. One is that it is true. It looks as if the packages are too high, and this is very correct, and something has to be done. But even though we take that particular roadmap, it's also very important for us to consider how are we going to deal with our strength of our shillings, so that at least commodities or our livelihood will be able to match with what literally we earn, because the two has to balance. You cannot decide today that you are going to reduce salaries or packages or allowances of staffs, when still the commodities are at the high level. One, you must give Kenyans a clear way. Today, you have put fuel very high. A fuel that at least one to survive will be too hard. And then at the other end, you want to reduce his salary. Then you find that at what common goal, common line is government to match with the balance. So it is a very tricky way and a very tricky situation. Because one is that, don't just you remember that if it is issue to do with housing, we have no control over housing. The government has no enough that it can tell us that actually it can afford to be able to serve its Kenyans with with what we call a ROA rate. What we have here is what we call competition of housing, and that you find that rentals are too high in terms of rates. And then you find that then once you come to transport, the transport also has come so high in terms because of as a result of the fuel increase.
All right.
So those two lines to make them balance is very tricky.
Okay.
But I think the government, what it should do is to calm down, find a way on how to strike a balance, both in what we call issue to do with skyrocketing of something to do with the fuel, which takes a lot of control in livelihood. Also what we call the commodities that people eat, and also the housing sector.
All right.
If something can be done there, and if actually we have realized the big four, I think some of the problems we are faced today could be well solved. Because if we could be having enough houses, then we could be having at lower housing, which can be able to take care.
Okay.
But today we are not yet there.
All right.
So as we move to do these reductions, let us compare that. In fact, we may do reduction where still a Kenyan may not be able to survive in this particular country, depending on the position we are in economically.
Okay, tough economic times, but this is definitely a welcome move by the SRC if this particular draft policy is adopted, because building of frameworks is definitely a proper way to circumvent mismanagement of funds. Gentlemen, let's talk about the examinations. Of course, just yesterday we saw day one of the KCPE examinations, even as hundreds failed to sit for exams as the test got underway. Many candidates dropped out of school while others got pregnant. Some of the candidates failed to show up at examination centers while others sat for papers from hospital wards due to various reasons, including giving birth. And they're being conducted after a difficult academic year disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a result, some candidates dropped out despite efforts to trace them and take them back to school. In terms of every candidate should be allowed to sit for this particular examination. Osido, let me start with you. Earlier on, we saw that move by the Ministry of Education to actually welcome candidates, even those who hadn't registered for the particular examinations. That is definitely a welcome move. But in terms of achieving that 100% transition, and we've just seen news around hundreds of candidates failing to turn up, how exactly should we conquer this challenge? Because year in, year out, it seems to be a key issue, yet education is a right for every child, irrespective of where they are.
Very right, Article 43 of the Constitution. Yes, true. I really have to applaud the Ministry of Education for coming up very strongly and working with the stakeholders to ensure that no child is left behind in this first tranche of the CBC. Number two is we need to see similar efforts like the ones that we saw when schools were initially opened, where the government, in fact, it was His Excellency the President who made a directive that all national government administrative officers, commonly referred to as NGAOs, go and comb every child to go back to school. We need to see those kind of efforts being taken again by the government officers where they are, because really these particular administrative officers are the ones who know where these kids come from every time they wake up with them from their homes, right at the village level, at the wards and the sub-counties. So if they can be empowered and asked to go and comb for these particular candidates. Of course, exams are ending today. It was yesterday and today. But I think we need to, moving forward, look at how we can be able to mitigate measures, particularly where we expect 100% turnout for candidates who are sitting exams. I'm hoping that these are lessons that will also inform the KCSE that is also coming up very soon, so that what is working well for KCP can be carried forward by the Ministry of Education and stakeholders, and what's not working very well then can inform us in terms of improvement. I was very impressed on a story I think I saw your studio undertake yesterday, where the CIS of Education actually went and visited a young girl in Isiolo who had just delivered, and she was due to sit her
All right,
exams.
Osido, allow me to cut you short as we fix your mic right there. Gakuya, you can come in with your point, even as we interrogate some issues around the examination. As KCP started yesterday, it's day 2 today. Teachers are being encouraged to go for the vaccination jab, even as they invigilate this particular examinations. Perhaps talk to us about this, even as the Ministry of Health actually says that the uptake of the vaccine is quite recommendable, allaying fears of the low or slow uptake.
Roger, let me say, according to the schedule released by the national government on the 3 clusters that actually they're intending to supply the job, it's like already the package of the teachers is in the first law. And teachers and nurses and doctors are at the front line, because teachers deals with learners, and learners are in big number, and therefore the importance of teachers taking jobs is necessary. And therefore, my take on this is that there should be no any reluctance on this. We must make sure that the government make sure that every other tutor, whoever he is, he has already attained his job, and unless one may wish not to go for the job because of his own reasons. But even though one may have his own reason, I still believe that, in fact, issue to do with the fear which has been there, and especially a fear that has been circulated by most of the social media, is a fear that actually our researchers should also come up and clear with, that where actually there is a fear of maybe the side effect of these particular jobs. Is a case that at least our research team should very quickly come up and make what we call an information to the public, to make sure that they guarantee the public that whatever job they are undertaking is quite okay and has no side effect.
Boosting public confidence,
of course, so that at least the fear can be ruled out.
All right. Well, we'll definitely continue interrogating some of these issues. Osido, I'll give you a few moments to perhaps finalize on your point earlier, even as we note that according to the ministry, there were no exam malpractices noted on day 1. Quite welcome news right there.
Yeah, of course, the tough talking CS, I think, has done quite a good role in terms, a good job in terms of not just talking tough so that people are scared about exam malpractices and the consequences, but really coming up to also embrace stakeholder engagement and consultation and conversation, so that people are doing what they are supposed to do to make the exam environment conducive. But on my earlier point, I was just reiterating the fact that the ministry has come up very strongly to work with even children who probably would have been scared of this exam, particularly given their conditions. Like, for instance, the CS of Education speaking to a lady at a hospital in Isiolo yesterday, where she was assuring her that it doesn't matter her condition, having been a mother from that a mother at that particular point in time, but that the ministry is going to, give her the security and the protection that she deserves. And it was even interesting to see her, writing her papers right on the hospital bed. I think that's something that really will be able to encourage enrollment even for, the hard-hit areas within our country, places where perennially education has not been a priority or a very prime issue. So it's important that the ministry is working with stakeholders, and we are hoping that this is going to be carried forward even to the KCSE as it is coming up, and that really this, for the first time that CBC is being examined, that we'll be able to learn lessons that can be able to safeguard education to the future generations.
Of course, a lot happening in the education sector, the rollout of the new curriculum, even as exams have just started. We expect KCSE to start in a few days' time. Well, that's the latest in terms of the papers. Gentlemen, many thanks for your time. And of course, back at home, make sure you interrogate the papers. Grab yourself a copy, because we've just highlighted some of the key stories in the Standard and the Daily Nation. I was joined by James Gakuya, Embakasi North Member of Parliament.